Okay, good morning. Hello, how are you, everyone? Thank you very much for being here. We are going to be hosting the session on land and nature-based solutions. Thank you very much, the speakers, for being here. Sorry for the delay. We are having, as usual, some technical issues, so thank you very much for your patience. I'm going to ask you to briefly introduce yourself. I'm going to give you the, you can use that one. You can briefly introduce yourself, and Carlos, you're going to be the first one to speak. Oh, if it works, you can use that one. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, so my name is Carlos Duarte. I'm Distinguished Professor of Marine Science at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. And I will be providing a definition, but also an inventory of nature-based solutions. If I can have my slides on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlos. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Pleased that you are here with us. I'm Santiago Lorenzo from the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm the head of the Climate Change Unit. I'm here to talk a little about some of the figures that are around nature-based solutions, and also some of the opportunities, economic opportunities that arise from making this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Santiago.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Thibaut, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Thibaut Maloza. I'm a researcher at INRAE, the National Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment in France, and working in a lab at the University Côte d'Azur. And I will talk about biosolutions, biocontrol solutions in agriculture.
Thank you. Etienne?
Thank you. I'm Etienne Danchin. I also work at INRAE, the French National Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment. So I'm an evolutionary biologist, and today I will talk about evolution-inspired solution for agriculture.
Thank you very much. Santiago, we are going to be starting with you since you don't have a presentation while they upload the other presentations, okay? Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, it probably is not the ideal because I see that Carlos will frame on definitions. So, but yes, it's a very practical way to go forward. So, in one thing, the context, nature-based solutions in Latin America. I'm going to talk about that, but it's in many regions in the south. You're aware that developing pathways of the southern had really pushed back the forest cover in most of the countries on Earth, and also let's be honest, in Europe as well. It's so many centuries ago that you can not perceive what happened many centuries ago, but always human development has been taking forest cover as the expansion for all activities, from urban areas to obviously food and agriculture. It is the way forward is to expand against forest cover. And forest cover gives us amazing ecosystem goods and services. The basic what that any exercise of economic value of ecosystems will never give you is that supports life on Earth. So when some years ago, when you come from an ecological, I'm an economist, but when you come from an ecological perspective and you go with some hard decision makers, they label it people as ecological people as tree huggers, and the truth is that all ecological people, ecological activists, we care for human life on Earth, because humans are just one species and the Earth can go without us, perfectly without us. So the question is, we have a niche as a species, and the niche has some ranges, and we need to work and to promote that we stay there. And why I say that? Because nature-based solutions is a way to recover from the economic perspective, because finally the loss of forest cover was because of economic needs. From an economic perspective, you can really push for recovering forest cover. In the region, we have, I'm going to use this, I don't use PPT, but I need some support. We have 9.3 million square kilometers of cover forest still, but we have been losing around almost 3,000 kilometers in the last 2 decades. That is 0.3% of cover loss per year. Right now in Glasgow, most of the, I think there is 1 or 2 that haven't signed, but the target of zero deforestation by 2030 was signed by all the countries in the region. And that's neat. What that means. We have made very recently some calculus, and to fulfill that, we just need to invest 0.06 of GDP on forest recovery. So it's neglected for what is an economy. And say nature-based solutions really can provide some of the finance that is required, but because we need to be honest, the pandemic has shown that all the economies in the region have a really tight fiscal space. So the burden of the sovereign debt, the urgent social and other environmental needs and economic needs on the population are really large. So the capacity of governments to invest in forests is really limited. In that sense, all the different schemes for nature-based solutions really can support. We have also calculated that, for instance, the benefits and co-benefits of investing, for instance, in mangroves, gives you up to 9 times what you invest. On dry agricultural practices, it can go to 11 times. So these are really wise investments that should be promoted. And the other thing, well done, nature-based solutions in the region means with a strong focus on biodiversity and local communities and indigenous people. The region has a myriad of indigenous peoples. Most of them are precisely in the front lines of deforestation. They are being pressed by huge, powerful economic actors, and we need to empower the local populations and the indigenous peoples. So they also take part of that, and they are the actors of that. That's one point. And the second point is making with biodiversity rich, recovering the original species for that, to get the cover forest back, because Latin America has at least 3 of the top 5, 6 mega-diverse countries. You have Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, but you also have Costa Rica, Peru, Ecuador. All of them are really biodiversity rich. And from an economic perspective, I can tell you, we have a crisis on a health crisis. It's still ongoing a little bit, but 2 years ago. We don't have the pharmaceutical capacity. We rely on vaccines from the north. But we have biodiversity as an input for what is now 95% of the pharmaceutical patents are based on biotechnology. So if we really create the value-added change based on biodiversity, we have biotechnology capacities in the region. If we create that, there is also a strong case to thrive with what is our natural cover. I leave it that now, and I thanks everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Santiago. Carlos, now it's your turn.
Thank you so much. So I will try to add by providing an inventory of nature-based solutions, first defining what nature-based solutions are, looking through the history of their development, and then providing some bracket estimates of what is the scope to contribute to climate action. So can I have the next slide, please? Yes. So Article 4 of the Paris Agreement then seeks to establish a balance between emission by sources and removal by sinks, which involves a circular economy that seeks inspiration in the way nature works, because the global carbon cycle before human disturbance have been in very close balance between carbon removal through photosynthesis and then emissions through respiration. Next slide. So we need to establish a circular carbon economy by activating circularity both in the way we manage the technosphere and the way we manage the biosphere and biological carbon cycles. And we do that through reduce, recycle, but particularly remove. And we can remove carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere by either technological fixes or by nature-based solutions, which is the part in the left of the screen. So nature-based solutions is actually a pathway to decarbonize the atmosphere by recarbonizing the biosphere. So we actually remove carbon that is already in the atmosphere and use that carbon to build living carbon on land and oceans, and also accumulate organic carbon in soils and other reservoirs. The scope for nature-based solutions is quite large, and it follows that in carbon accounting, we estimate that about 38% of the cumulative greenhouse emissions are actually due to the component that is called land use change, that includes both changes in land cover and the management of soils, but also changes in the ocean. And currently, it's about 24% of annual greenhouse emissions come from impacting on ecosystems broadly. So it follows that the full scope to repair nature can address 38% of the climate problem. A number of nature-based solutions have been put forward, both on land and more recently ocean, obviously reforestation and avoidance of losses of forest, peatland restoration, biochar, amendment of soils with carbon to increase the carbon content of soils, and also embodying wood and biomass into buildings, both in terms of beams or wood, but also material use as for isolation coming from organic carbon that is then preserved in buildings rather than be preserved in soils or decomposed in soils. And on the ocean, then we have blue carbon, more recently silver aquaculture, and then there's other new emerging topics like rebuilding the stocks of large marine animals that can also contribute to carbon removal, and also more recently manage the carbon stocks in the seafloor. In 1992, the first effort to embark in a global program to restore degraded peatlands was put forward in Finland. And then 2005 to 2008, the UN RED program was established to avoid deforestation and also promote afforestation programs. Later on 2009, then the concept of embodying forest products into buildings and also replace fossil fuels to contribute to mitigation was put forward. And at the same time, then we published the Blue Carbon Report that look at how conservation and restoration of coastal habitat can contribute also to climate change mitigation and adaptation as a nature-based solution. 2010, a paper calculated the carbon benefits of whales, and therefore if we rebuild the largest stock of whales, that will lead to carbon removal with significant potential in terms of carbon removal as well. And then more recently, then we put forward the notion that also seaweed farming can be used as a carbon removal component and can contribute importantly to climate change mitigation adaptation. And lastly, also the concept of sinking large masses of sargassum that are accumulating in the tropical Atlantic has been put forward as a nature-based solution. I have issues with that one, but also management of oyster reefs and other benthic ecosystems are also being explored as a nature-based solution. So we can see then an evolution of nature-based solution options that include start by activating options on soils and forests and peatlands, and more recently then on the ocean. In this slide, I tried to summarize the scope of CO2 removal through nature-based solutions. So when you have two numbers, the upper number represents the carbon dioxide sequestration, typically per year, although sometimes because we cannot scale it up, we express it per hectare per year, otherwise it's global. And then the number below indicates the potential to avoid emissions. So we have afforestation, if driven to its full potential, can contribute up to 9 petagrams carbon dioxide sequestration. I think that should be per year. And then also you can avoid conservation and avoidance of deforestation can also contribute very importantly. Peatland restoration can also contribute in terms of avoidance in the order of petagram of carbon dioxide per year, which is a big number. But in terms of sequestration through restoration of peatlands, then about 0.3 petagram carbon per year. Soil amendment has also a strong potential to contribute about up to 11 petagram carbon dioxide removal per year. And then biochar amendment also about 1 petagram per year. And then embodying wood forest products into buildings can also lead to a very large carbon removal capacity. And on land, we have also a number of options that can reach very high potential numbers. For instance, in the case of seaweed aquaculture, we are to fully utilize the space of the ocean that is available to do that sustainably. We could reach up to 5 petagram carbon dioxide per year. So these are actually potential, sometimes they are brackets because there are quite a bit of uncertainties. But when you look at the upper limits of these potentials, you get close to about 1/3 of the carbon mitigation that is required to meet our climate goals. And therefore, these actions should not be only quantified in terms of carbon, but they also generate important co-benefits for all. And therefore, I think this is an option that we need to activate with the highest possible ambition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thibaut, your turn.
Thank you very much. So I will talk about nature-based solution in agriculture. And just to start with the topic, I would like to remind how agriculture is important for the topics of climate change, and it has a very significant impact on our climate change through land use of agrochemistry-based solutions, and so it's a very important matter. And well, for those who were here in this very same room yesterday, we discussed about agrochemistry and how it's unsustainable, and we also discussed about the fact that an urgent shift to agroecology is necessary to replace the use of chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides by a set of other solutions, all nature-based. And so the idea of agroecology is to combine a set of levers in systems that are not generic, that are tailored to each condition. So some places will be more oriented toward technologies, other to more like ancestral farming, whatever. The idea is really opposed to agrochemistry in the sense that we don't look for generic solutions. We need solutions that are tailored to each place and each socioeconomic realities. And the main levers we want to combine are the following on those slides. There are, of course, all the agronomic practices, how you work with the soil, for example, but it's also a matter of landscape management. Agriculture is not just a question of field. You really need to think about the whole landscape. Then there is a huge lever about also the intraspecific diversity, cultivars, and also interspecific variability and diversity within fields, around fields. Today I will concentrate more on the following biosolutions, which correspond to biocontrol, biostimulation, and biofertilization that kind of replace agrochemical solutions. And even the ones that cannot be considered directly as a natural components, like machinery, digital tools, are actually enabling technologies, and they are here to maximize, optimize the use of nature-based solutions. So just a couple of definitions just to differentiate between biostimulation, biocontrol, etc. At the center of this slide you get the plant, well, kind of what I represented as a plant. And the plant is actually exposed to a set of stresses or resources, abiotic stresses like temperature, humidity, etc. And we can modulate, manage the response of the plant to those stresses through biostimulation. Then there are biotic stresses, namely pests, pathogens, all those animals or plants that challenge the crops. And there we are in the field of crop protection, of pesticides, for example, and there so the alternative solutions are biological control. And finally, the plant is, of course, benefiting from nutrients, and there is the field of biofertilizers. And I will speak mostly about biocontrol today. So what are those solutions? Well, mainly there are actually 4 categories. Microorganisms, like bacteria, fungi, viruses, that will kill the pests. Semiochemicals, that are odors. Pheromones are for intraspecific communication, for males to find females, for example, while pheromones are more for insects to find their plants or their environment. And we can modify that to kind of guide or trap the pests in the crops. Then at the bottom, another category is macrobiomes or macroorganisms, which correspond to mites, insect, nematodes that are used to fight against pests or weeds. And finally, there is a last category, natural substances, that differ in terms of regulation among countries, but correspond to components that are extracted from animal, vegetables, or even in some countries, mineral components are considered biocontrol. So then the next question is what to do with those players of biological control, what to do with these organisms and substances. There are several ways to use them. We can use them as products, as inputs, with a manufacturer that then sells to a distributor and then sells to farmers. We can subdivide this category of natural substances and augmentation biocontrol into different types of biocontrol or solutions based on the quantity you use and the way they act on the agrosystem. Natural substances are almost like chemical pesticides, but they are natural. Inundative biocontrol relies on a huge amount of organisms that you release into the fields, while inoculation is more like to establish a population of organisms for a while in the field. Then there is conservation biocontrol. There the idea is not to introduce something, not to release something, but to try to maximize the effect of the organisms that are already there, already in the field or the surrounding environment. And this can be done through planting flowers, through planting edges, through manipulating the whole landscape. And there is also the field of digital tools that can enable to manage and try to pilot the systems. And finally, establishment biocontrol, that is kind of a specific use. It's in case of invasion, so biological invasion from, for example, a biodiversity hotspot. The pest arrives, it's not followed by its natural enemies, it infests everything. And so the idea there is to come back to the native place, get natural enemies, check that they will not affect the biodiversity in the target country, and then release the organisms that are innocuous to the local biodiversity but effective against the pest. So where are we in terms of biocontrol, in terms of use of those biosolutions? The market is increasing. These are data from IBMA for Europe, for example. So we see that from 2016, 2019, it really increased. But still, it's an increase, but within a very small share of the market. We are just at 3% approximately of the crop protection market. And why? And I think that, well, I cannot finish this presentation without telling that all those biosolutions are not equal in terms of sustainability, because, for example, well, of course, chemical pesticides are not sustainable, but all the others are not exactly the same. For example, when you use natural substances, somehow you use the same logics. You are still releasing some compounds in the environment. Then when you use inundative biocontrol, you use inputs, but small quantities, so it's more sustainable. When we switch to conservation biocontrol, we rely on existing biodiversity. So it's the most reliable, the less costly for farmers as well. And establishment biocontrol is also very sustainable, very cost effective, of course, because you release once and then there is a permanent and free service. But it's a little less sustainable because there is this risk of effect on local biodiversity. And there is a paradox, because we see that public and private investments actually target the least sustainable solutions. Governments, private companies invest mainly on R&D, still on chemical pesticides, or on the natural solutions that are most closely related to them. And so we need to change that. We really need to change, because actually, well, this dominant system using a lot of inputs is not sustainable. And it's even worse, actually. If we continue to use the same business model, using inputs, using the same kind of modes of action, we actually reinforce the dominant system without wanting. A lot of companies working on biocontrol and trying to combine biocontrol with pesticide actually reinforce the dominant system, so they actually play against themselves. And that's an interest. Well, I will not detail all this because I think I don't have the time today, but the idea is really that actually it keeps the system equal. The system is locked and actually very detrimental to biosolutions. And so by using the biosolutions that are closely related to chemicals, it's the same. We kind of continue working with pesticide infrastructures, with the same machines for pesticide, with the same systems based on monocultures, etc. And so, well, this is something that we try to take into account in policies of research and innovation in Europe and in France in particular, with the objective of diversifying business models, trying to find new ways to exploit and create value using really those biosolutions. And we also try to do this in a context of, or in a future without pesticides, to make sure that we get creative, we really think out of the box and try to find the way that really optimize the use of natural-based solutions. And so this is something that we are going to start through different programs. In France, we have a large research and innovation program starting next year with 42 million dedicated to this, to really think out of the box and create demonstration, proofs of concept, research on agroecology. And we are also defending this idea at the international level in Europe through an alliance, and at the international level outside Europe through a new network called Agroecological Crop Protection. Thank you very much for your attention.
Etienne?
Yes. So thank you everyone Thanks the organizers to give me the opportunity to present my talk now, if it's arriving, I hope. Okay. Thank you, Saran. So I'm Etienne Danchin, and I work at Institut Sophia Agrobiotech, which is a joint effort between INRAE, Université Côte d'Azur, and the CNRS. Next. So agriculture, as you probably know, is both a contributor and also a victim of climate change. Food production is the major contributor to land use and conversion, which is itself the third source of human-caused greenhouse gas emission. So this causes climate change, and climate change itself causes drought, floodings, and it's also very favorable for pest and parasite proliferation and migration. So all these impact negatively food production. So you have this circle of problem that auto-feeds. So next, please. Another parameter to take into account is that the global human population will continue to grow at least until 2064. So according to to this paper, we'll peak around 9-10 billion people around 2064. So with this comes an increased need for food production. So it's been estimated that the global food production will need to increase between 25 and 70% to sustain the need of this growing population. So how to reconcile higher production with climate change mitigation? More land conversion is definitely not an option, as we have seen, because it causes more CO2 emission. And also you have a risk of exposition to new pests and pesticides that come from the wild. So basically we need to produce more using less land. So the idea is to improve yield per surface, but how can we do that? Using more fertilizer is also not a good solution, not a good option, because it produces another gas, which is nitrous oxide, which is also a greenhouse gas. So there are some promising solutions like biochar, like Carlos introduced you, and also biostimulation by fungi and bacteria. Another solution that I'm more directly invested in is to improve plant resistance, for instance, to abiotic stress, like drought or floodings. So, for example, with my colleagues in Embrapa in Brazil, we have identified genes that provide drought resistance in wild relatives of peanuts. So this opens new hopes for introgressing these genes in peanuts now. And what I'm going to talk about more now is reduce the losses caused by pests and pathogens, because the main topic of my research. So to give you an idea, pests, pathogen and parasite destroy every year 20 to 30% of the world agricultural production. And this is despite the considerable efforts made to control them, like pesticide, all the techniques that also Thibaut has introduced you. So despite all these efforts, pests and parasites destroy 20 to 30% of the world agriculture. And the problem is that climate change exacerbates the problem. So some pesticides are less efficient with temperature. Some resistant genes in plants are temperature dependent also. So with climate change, they are not efficient anymore. And as I said previously, this situation is very favorable for the proliferation and expansion of pests and parasites. So next. So how it is related to nature-inspired solutions? What do species in nature through times? They evolve and they adapt. How? Actually, they accumulate mutation in their DNA through life, in their genomes. So this provides a variability of forms and fitness. And this diversity of form and fitness, like in this toy, they are subject to the filter of selection. So certain forms are adapted to the selection. But if the environment changes, the face of the cube changes, and you select other forms. The problem is that pests and parasites, they tend to evolve faster than their host, because they have shorter generation time, they generally have higher offspring per generation, and bigger population size. So there is a higher variability, and they are more easily, they adapt more easily. Next, please. So in this tree that you have here, you have around 1.5 billion years of evolution. So it's the tree of eukaryotes. Eukaryotes, it's organisms like us that have their DNA in chromosomes that are packaged in a nucleus. So all the species that have a nucleus are called eukaryotes. And during the evolution of eukaryotes, plant parasitism arose several times independently, like in nematodes, this worm, arthropods, or mycetes, which are the species we study in our lab. You have plants also here. So we, as human beings, we are, at this scale, we are a very, very close relative to nematodes and arthropods and fungi. So our question and how we study is we try to understand how has this ability to manipulate plant emerged during evolution. So to do that, we decode the genomes of agricultural pests and compare them to the genome of other species to try to unlock the secrets of their adaptation to plant parasitism. So for instance, in 2008, we were the first to decode the genome of an animal able to parasitize plant, the root knot nematode Melodogaina incognita. And further studies show that these species have stolen genes from fungi and bacteria to now degrade the plant cell wall. We also have identified several genes that are typical, that only exist in plant parasite, and we have shown that inactivating these genes reduce plant parasitism. Next, please. So the things I presented you so far relates to all the evolutionary time. So our other question is how pests and parasites adapt now and in more recent scales to environmental change, including control methods. So to do that, we need to compare the genomes of different populations of the same species in different environments and conditions. And the idea is to try to identify the genomic variation associated to their adaptation. So recently, we identified mutations and mutators in the gene of the root knot nematode that were related to their diversification and their ability to attack a wide host range. Next, please. So the take-home message of this study is that pests and pathogens cause 20 to 30% loss on worldwide production despite all the efforts. We must reduce the losses using more environment-friendly and sustainable methods. And in our lab, we study species natural evolution to try to inspire new methods to better combat them. Next, please. So in future direction, we are now incorporating artificial intelligence to accelerate genomic analysis and to be ready for the many, many new genomes that are coming thanks to technological progress. And we want to extend this analysis to other pests and species to identify convergent evolution that will highlight crucial central genes for plant parasitism. So keep in mind that everything I said so far is before harvest. But after harvest, another 30% of global food production is lost and wasted, 14% between harvest and the market, and 17% at the market, between the market and consumer level. And this is very sad because at the same time on the same planet, people die from hunger and famine. So we must do something also about that. And we are part of the solution because we are part of nature also. So thanks a lot. I would like to thank also all my team here.
Thank you, Etienne, very, very much. Unfortunately, Sonia couldn't connect. Sonia is the director, executive director at Mary Foundation and the director of one of our emblematic projects, which is the Blue Boat Initiative. And one of our main challenges in that project was to provide a value to the whale so as to understand because of the ecosystem value in carbon capture that it has. So my first question to you all is, how do we provide an economic value, maybe Santiago can answer that as an economist, to the nature-based solution and all those projects that you have. And afterwards, I would like to give the word to the audience.
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, the problem is not that they don't provide economic value. The problem is that we don't perceive the value as a society. We don't really put the money. We are free riders of nature. We have been free riders of nature. We continue to be free riders. There is a problem, and a structural problem for nature to come to the market, and the market is the place where we set value to things, to environmental or ecosystem services and goods. The question is, there is not an institution, a person, an actor in the market that embodied this natural value. So there is not the one that supply. So what we have been developing for more than, let's say, 40 years is like economic valuation of ecosystems, goods and services. And this is something that put value in the mind of decision makers, but is not in the marketplace. Sometimes there are some specific instruments, like let's say in the emissions trading schemes, you can put some conservation projects as capture of CO2, etc. This is some efforts, and the value comes from demand and supply in that particular narrow market that is being created by human efforts specifically for that. But it is not a natural development that happens as other markets. And the idea to put figures has been mostly to persuade public policy that they have to invest in some natural ways. Also, you have other ways, like for whales, in many places, what is used is sustainable tourism and whale sightseeing, and then there is some interest by locals to conserve the whale because they have some industry, but it's not the real value that they provide to us. And the question is, when you, specifically, what I really put forward in these conversations is, you never have to trust a value that is set by any methodology, by economists. I'm an economist, and I have done economic valuation of biodiversity. I was co-chair of the OECD working group on economic aspects of biodiversity for 4 years. And we work with really the best minds in the moment. And the question is that you have two systems. The economic markets, you can see that each day in the journals, in the TV, you see the economic news searching how the market is that day and spot information that day. And also you have, and we have been talking about that, the evolution of nature is constant. It's non-stop. Ecosystems evolve. So you have two dynamic systems, and the practices of economic valuation of biodiversity is a photograph of two films. So the one moment that you make the photograph, immediately is not exactly the same. And probably is radically differently. All depends how these systems change, because that's the problem with economic valuation. So you have two films and one photograph that have to reflect these two films. So in that sense, we can make economic valuation, we can create markets to represent nature, but we always underestimate the value of nature. We need to be aware of that. And the problem here is that in biodiversity is a public good, and we have been years and years and years narrowing the role of the state, because we feel that the state is not efficient and markets are more efficient, and for some issues that is true, but for common goods it's not possible to do that, and the state has to have a role and has to invest. The state are us. We also, that's a problem. The state sometimes don't represent us. But the state, all of us. The state needs to be accountable, needs to be transparent, and needs to be dynamic. And the state needs to take on their hands some issues that are really important. So markets are important, but also we have seen in the last years that there is a role for the state, but the problem sometimes is the state, how it is designed. So I think there are some techniques for Wales. Tourism has been a good example for providing income to communities, but we need other complementary efforts.
Thank you very much. Would you like to make some remarks on the question? You don't.
Maybe just a fast remark about agriculture, because somehow it's a little bit simpler, because finally, who creates value in the value chain of agriculture? In the end, it's the consumer, retailers, consumers, restaurants, markets. And there, so we really have a lever for public regulation. We can really, create a demand for quality food at the level of the retailers, for example, and that will impact all the value chain and ultimately reach the farmers. And this is somewhere, it looks simple, but this is somewhere we are really not efficient currently, while there is a very powerful lever to activate.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the word to the audience in case you have any question. Of course.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I enjoyed a lot. I have a question mainly to Thibault. You spoke about nature-based solutions in particular for agriculture. Are they more, or are they efficient in the same way as chemical pesticide, or they are more expensive or less expensive? Can you say a few words? Because otherwise, why we are using chemistry? Is it simpler? Can you comment? Thank you.
Well, that's the key question, actually. Because the point is that when you replace chemical pesticides by natural-based solution like biocontrol, you are really not on the same mode of action. You don't see an immediate short-term curative effect, and so it's apparently less efficient or effective, and that's the issue. So well, farmers spray a pesticide while they see instantaneously the aphid or whatever pest fall, and it's effective. When you rely on long-term regulation, long-term equilibria of agro-ecosystem, you don't. And so currently we also need tools to make this more visible. And the other point related to efficacy, efficiency, is that we currently use mostly biocontrol solutions in systems that are done, set, built for pesticides. And so with machines that are not adapted to biocontrol, with systems that are not favorable to biocontrol, with advice also that is made for the use of pesticides, and this even decrease the apparent efficiency of biocontrol. That's why there is a sort of vicious circle that we need to really break.
Thank you very much. Some other question? Yes.
Just following on from that point, how quickly can you potentially see the increased carbon sequestration capability of the soil in that sort of scenario?
Well, that's a good question. I'm absolutely not expert on carbon sequestration in soils, but I could not give you an estimate of time, but I know that there are a lot of projects ongoing on that to try to quantify real time, or at least at the level of a season, the carbon sequestration, depending on the type of plant you use, depending on the type of agronomic practices, or the type of crop rotation system you implement. So I think it can be quite fast.
Final question, last chance for the audience. Okay, Carlos and Etienne. Yes, go ahead, Carlos, please.
No, just to mention that in terms of soil carbon management, the French government released a pledge or a challenge to increase the carbon content of agricultural soils by 0.4% per year. So 4 per thousand, I think is just translated to English the name of the program. So the assessment is that it might be possible to increase the soil content through changes in agricultural practices by 0.4% per year. And the scope of that is realized is actually very large in terms of global carbon sequestration, but also will increase water use efficiency of crops because the soils will retain more moisture.
I know there is no soil expert. Claudio Michaelis from Germany, from the Max Planck Institute. I know there is no soil expert here, but there was a very huge bracket from 1.1 gigatons to 11 for sequestration capability. Why that huge span? Like, what's in that? What are the effects that make this so uncertain?
Well, so the uncertainties on nature-based solutions that I showed come from multiple sources. One of them is uncertainties about the global stocks of carbon in soils, forests, and so on. So when you take an action at the global scale, then of course there isn't, you cannot really apply an average. There is a lot of variability across bioregions and so on. So that variability eventually they propagate in an uncertainty band. So that is one of the main drivers of the brackets around the scope of these solutions. But also the constraints to implement the solution to the maximum possible level, and then assumptions around how to navigate around those constraints. For instance, the Trillion Tree initiative was put forward, and there was artificial intelligence used to try to map out the area available to plant trees and come up with a very high number. But then further analysis showed that some of the areas that were identified as suitable for reforestation will likely fail, so that can brought the estimates downward. So the brackets are mostly a combination of uncertainty and then constraints.
Thank you, Carlos. Etienne, would you like to make some final remarks?
Maybe, yes, but maybe we should get inspired more about how species evolve together to find more durable, more sustainable solution. And because, for instance, all the pests and parasites I've talked about during my talk cause no problem in the wild, actually. No problem in the forest, not problem in the wild. So it's a problem of how we plant and the problem of agriculture that is basically planting a clone of the same species in square kilometers and square kilometers. So we should think about how nature is resilient to this pest and parasite, also maybe to inspire agroecology and this kind of solution.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the audience for being here. It's been really fruitful. I like when the audience gets involved and make questions to the speakers. And thank you for being here. Thank you very, very much.